What is going on, my YouTube friends? It is Trevor coming at you here on a Sunday, and I want to talk to you guys about MSTR stock and Bitcoin. Um, so what I want to talk about today is more about the delisting. Potentially, MSTR is getting delisted from the Nasdaq, from the QQQs, and then I also want to talk about the recent Bitcoin price action. How we've seen basically over 6% gains from the bottom of Bitcoin at like around 81K. With that, if you are interested in this kind of stuff, definitely consider subscribing to the channel. We bring daily content about AI and crypto and robotics. So yeah, definitely consider subscribing. And like the video if you don't mind. Helps out the channel a lot. And let me know your Bitcoin price targets down below in the comment section. Okay, so the delisting. So MSTR is, they're talking about potentially delisting MSTR from the Nasdaq, right? And my contention with this, the number one thing for me is that it just doesn't matter. Like, it matters a little bit, but like not really. Because if you can look at MSTR's like MNAV right now, they're multiple to the net asset value. The fact that they're in the QQQs, the Nasdaq, means essentially absolutely nothing. I mean, if your MNAV is 1.0, so there's no premium associated with your company, then whether you're in the Nasdaq or not, I don't see how it changes anything whatsoever, right? Everyone knows that the Nasdaq is the Cadillac of exchanges, and that the S&P 500 is where like a lot of retirement money goes to, right? So it's like the S&P 500 is actually the holy grail when it comes to indices, because you're just going to get tons of inflows, right? And that's the argument that people make about MSTR, and that they'll have outflows of money if they get removed from the Nasdaq, right? They'll have a couple $1 billion in outflows, but I don't see it. And maybe if that happens, it'll just get replenished because, inherently MSTR is going to get valued by the Bitcoin they have on their balance sheet and their debt. That's going to be prioritized over every other valuation, regardless of what indice it's in, whatever index it's in, regardless of anything, right? It's how much Bitcoin do they have on their balance sheet, how much debt do they have, subtract that out, and then it's going to be basically valued at, approximately that value or more. And if it's less than that, then you're getting a steal, right? Because you're just getting essentially Bitcoin for free, in a company that can accrete you more Bitcoin over time. So it's definitely bullish. That being said, MicroStrategy does still make $500 million a year from their operating software business, and they've got gigantic, companies that use their software, such as like Amazon, Johnson & Johnson, Snowflake, these types of companies. So I'm not saying it's like clearly their profits and their revenues are not really driven by their software capabilities, right? At this point, because they've got, $50 billion worth of Bitcoin on the balance sheet. But at the same time, that software company is still there. It still exists. So whether the regulators decide to kick them out by reclassifying them as a financial company, or if they continue to leave them as a software company, I think MSTR is just going to be just fine. Is my contention here, because like they're not valued. Like the Nasdaq premium right now is essentially zero. Like that's my contention. Is if you're trading at an MNAV of 1, the Nasdaq is doing absolutely nothing for you, because you pull out those couple billion, then you're at an MNAV of less than 1. Then someone's going to go in there and be like, okay, this is a steal. I'm getting a bargain. I'm going to go and buy strategy stock, right? Maybe in like a super bear market, the MNAV could go below 1. We've seen that back in like 2022. But that was also only 2 years after inception, or not necessarily inception, but like, okay, I'll use inception. The inception of the new business model, right? Then transferring over to a Bitcoin first approach. And so whether we'll ever see like those MNAV ratios again, I'm not sure. We've certainly gotten close recently, right? With the recent drawback to the 170s for MicroStrategy. But, I think Monday we're going to see a gigantic upheaval in the stock price as long as Bitcoin stays up. Because Bitcoin, this is a good transition point to my next point, right? Bitcoin is at like $86,000 right now, right? And a big deal is that, if Bitcoin stays low, if it stays in the 80s, right, or goes lower, a lot of companies are going to have to start, reporting earnings, right? And they're going to have to say, hey, because the new reporting procedures and policies, they have to now basically act as if these Bitcoin, the Bitcoin that they hold, their unrealized gains or profits, they have to, identify that as profits or losses on the balance sheet for their quarterly report, right? So we're about to see a lot of, if Bitcoin does not recover, we're about to see a lot of like gigantic losses on, corporate balance sheets from publicly traded companies that, won't look so good. The Teslas of the world, the Coinbases, Robinhood, the Strategy, it's like, and that could be a really big deal, because we could, we've already seen the stock market, the S&P fall back quite a bit. And if we can see, we continue to see this happening, and then we also see like, we had a surprise with jobs numbers, right, from September. So that was good. There's a lot of jobs basically created in September. But, like everyone is talking about recession right now, right? Where, everyone's saying this time isn't different, blah, blah, blah. All the recession indicators are here, and it's just one of those things where like, yeah, you're always going to get that FUD, whether it's about the, and the thing is like FUD is sometimes warranted and sometimes FUD is not warranted, right? So like fear, uncertainty, and doubt, if the economy's not looking good, then the economy's not looking good. But the fact of the matter is, look at what kind of rate environment we're in right now. We're still seeing job growth, at least as of September, right? And we're still at very inflated Fed rates, right? So that's like that's like a recession kind of like trigger, right? Was what I'm saying is like if we do actually see declining jobs numbers, we see issues like big issues in the economy. The Fed has multiple points of interest that they can decrease, right? Like interest rates are not zero. If we were seeing interest rates at zero and still there's recession talks, that would be very, very, very bad, because there's no way to counteract that balance, right? But right now, interest rates are very high. They're still very high. So it's like, if we see problems, they can hit that switch. They can continue to, decrease rates. So that's what makes me feel better about the whole situation, right? If we do see companies, publicly traded companies, gigantic companies having to report, pretty large, losses on their, for their quarterly reports, hopefully that won't get people spooked out of the market, because also, like a stock market crash could cause like a recession as well, because you got all these people with, excess money putting their money in the stock market, and then if they lose money, they're on margin order, they have to sell, and that triggers more selling and more selling. And it's happened historically, right? There's been previous recessions caused simply because of like mass hysteria in the stock market, right? People just selling like crazy. People basically prophesizing a recession and then manifesting it through selling all of their assets and all their publicly traded assets. So don't want to see that, because we don't want to see Bitcoin in a bear market or Bitcoin down a crazy low. But yeah, guys, that's kind of the idea. Is like, I don't agree with the reporting policies that you have to report like unrealized capital gains. I think it's a little bit ridiculous, but at the same time, because like Strategy, when they report their quarterly earnings, whether it's up or down, like that's like one of the companies that like the quarterly earnings just doesn't matter at all. You already know everything about the company on a daily basis. The only uncertainty involved with MicroStrategy stock is Bitcoin price, right? Because you know exactly what the price of the Bitcoin is. You know exactly what the price of the Bitcoin that they bought was at, their average price. You know everything. So you're reporting this net loss or net gain for what? You know what I mean? It's like, it's not going to change anything. It might change like that the day of, because you got traders saying, oh, they made this many million in revenue, or this many million, or this many billion, whatever it is, right? But it is just kind of pointless, I can kind of get it with companies that aren't Bitcoin treasury companies. If you just hold Bitcoin on the treasury of your specific company, and that's not your first and foremost approach to your business, then maybe it's a little different. Maybe it's harder for people to calculate, harder for people to understand, or it's just it's one of those things. You don't want Bitcoin going to zero and then the company never talking about that, or like providing an unrealized loss, and then all of a sudden they take it, and then it's like one quarter they just get demolished, right? I think that's why they did it, but who knows. But anyway, guys, that's kind of my video for today. I just wanted to go again and talk about the delisting, and how like if there's no premium associated with being on the Nasdaq because you are a Bitcoin first and foremost company, like, then who cares about being in the Nasdaq, right? That's my point about the S&P 500. I think it's completely just a 180-degree difference, right? Like, completely different being in the S&P. You now have inflows from people's 401ks and IRAs, right? And like a huge inflows, right? So like that's why almost every company you ever see that gets inducted into the S&P 500 goes up a lot, right? They get premiums associated with their valuations because they are considered one of the best 500 companies in the world, you know, or at least in publicly traded United States companies. Um, so that if they were in the S&P 500 and they were given a premium, which I think would happen, you know, to their MNAV, that would be completely and utterly different than just being in the Nasdaq. Like being in the Nasdaq is cool. It's the Cadillac of exchanges. You're with all the big tech companies. You know, it's a gigantic index. It's cool to be in there. But when we saw MicroStrategy get inducted into the Nasdaq, it didn't help the price of MSTR whatsoever. You know, and I really don't see if they get kicked out it affecting it either, because they are an MNAV focused company. That's how they're valued. They're not valued by what index they're in, right? Nasdaq, schmasdaq, when it comes to MSTR is what I'm getting at. Like, nobody cares. No one's giving MicroStrategy any more dollars because they're in the Nasdaq, right? Because if the MNAV goes up because of some inflows from the Nasdaq, then people are selling because they don't like the MNAV that it's at, right? It's all a balancing act with a Bitcoin treasury company valued at an MNAV, right? And like I said, the second point in summary was Bitcoin's at 86K now. We'll see what it's at tomorrow upon, like, you know, when the stock market opens. We'll see how much strategy is up if you know, Bitcoin holds this 86K level or higher. And yeah, guys, it seems like it's a great time to be an investor. You got money on the sidelines. Bitcoin's really low. Strategy is really low. I mean, the S&P 500 is really low. The whole market's at a pullback. So yeah, if you got any money on the sidelines, I mean, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm just a guy on YouTube. Don't sue me, bro. But it seems like a good time to deploy some money into the markets if you have a long-term mindset. So guys, with that, thank you for watching. Definitely consider subscribing. Let me know your Bitcoin price targets down below, and have yourself a fantastic Sunday.